I love musicals. And those of you who know I am a Star Trek fan will not be surprised to hear that I appreciate George Takei. So watching a musical about Takei's true life experience should be great fun for me, right? But February 19th, the day I attended such a play, was also the 75th anniversary of the day that President Roosevelt authorized the incarceration of Japanese Americans and immigrants, the subject of the play called Allegiance. Through the eyes of one family, the drama communicated the experience of the more than 110,000 people of Japanese ancestry in the United States at the time, who were torn from their homes, businesses, and communities, and concentrated in internment camps. The United States was at war with the Empire of Japan. Regardless of the myriad ways Japanese Americans tried to express their allegiance in word and deed to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, those who looked like our enemy would not be trusted. Allegiance wasn't all grim. The play also had a great deal of humor, engaging music, dancing, and singing. I laughed heartily, and I was entertained. But I have to confess, I have also never wept so much throughout a performance as I did while watching Allegiance. Way more than I surely cried when I saw Schindler's List, in which far more unspeakable things happened to innocent people. I had gone with a friend, and she confessed afterwards that she cried easily at movies, so this was no surprise for her. But I do not. What was I to make of the tears that streamed down my face intermittently for almost 2 hours? You may have heard the saying from Faulkner that the past is never dead. It isn't even past. That's the thing. As I watched Allegiance, I could not shake the feeling that the events depicted, 7 decades past as they were not as past as they should be. My tears reflected the moment we are in today in America. We have an administration in the White House that holds an image of who they think the enemy is. Perhaps I should say who the enemies, plural, are. They do not trust anyone who looks like that or who worships like that, and have sown suspicion in the American people about such people as well. Regardless of the facts about what actually endangers us and what might actually foster our safety and security, this administration is willing to build policies around the worst fears about people who are perceived as others. Of course, today, unlike in the Allegiance play, the focus is overtly on refugees and new immigrants, not on those who have already become citizens, as was the case for many of the people of Japanese heritage that were interned. The focus is on keeping certain non-citizens out. I'd like to think we have crossed some historical milestone in our nation's cultural development to where we would never let that happen to U.S. citizens again, even if they did look like some actual enemy. But that's small comfort. In a country that has long been known as a land of immigrants, as a land of hope that welcomed your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. This outsized fear of foreigners still cuts into the core of our self-understanding as Americans. Today, the foundations of our democracy appear to be under attack. Perhaps you are worried about the erosion of voting rights, the undermining of public schools, or accelerating efforts to chip away at Roe v. Wade. I, for one, am alarmed by the loss of local home rule on such matters as bathroom access for students of all gender identities in our schools, or the ability of cities to ban fracking or otherwise protect public health and safety as they best see it. Our free press clearly is on the defensive and hampered in its ability to serve its vital function. Our president also openly proclaims his readiness to start undoing the separation of church and state. I've read coverage about the suppression of First Amendment rights for flesh and blood persons, as well as the co-optation and effective use of First Amendment rights by so-called corporate persons. You can probably name other areas that call into question the fundamental health of our democracy. It's a long, frightening list. On the other side of that ledger, I know many of us are doing various things to try to make a difference. We are going to marches and protests, as we heard. I know there were some young adults who did that yesterday as well. We are advocating to public policymakers in the Capitol or by phone calls, letters, emails. Some are participating in political parties of their choice, even running for office. Some are actively engaging with people of different viewpoints in conversations that seek to bridge the divide and create deeper mutual understanding. Many of us are developing our networks of supportive relationships and deepening our spiritual practices so that our resistance will be resilient. I know many of you are doing things like this. Last month, in response to the Trump administration's travel ban against people from Muslim-majority countries, this congregation took the step of creating a banner that many here signed with the message, "Westside UU supports our Muslim neighbors." About a dozen of us met at the Islamic Association of Tarrant County earlier this week to present this banner of goodwill. You can see Cindy Fountain, our social justice chair, presenting it. We learned more about our neighbors as we expressed our support for Muslims in Greater Fort Worth who may be feeling less welcome and safe in the current climate. Our hosts at the mosque could not have been more warm, hospitable, or open to our group. They really went overboard. When the imam realized the reason for our visit, receiving the banner of friendship, his chatty manner changed. He paused a moment to take this in and expressed repeatedly to us how much the community he served would appreciate this gesture. He would present the banner to them on Friday, he told us, at the religious service where the largest number of people would be gathered. And we have received emails from several folks since our visit as well, thanking us for reaching out to them. One of the heroes I acquired during my years in Indiana, a native of Terre Haute like my husband, was Eugene Debs. A labor and political leader, Debs knew deep in his bones about solidarity. His words ring in my ear. "Years ago," Debs said, "I recognized my kinship with all living beings, and I made up my mind then that I was not one bit better than the meanest on earth. I said then, and I say now, that while there is a lower class, I am in it. And while there is a criminal element, I am of it. And while there is a soul in prison, I am not free." If ever a politician truly pledged allegiance to this country's ideals, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, it surely was Gene Debs. We know this impulse today, too, the same one that Debs articulated. It's an instinctive reaching out in solidarity, a determination not to be divisible as a people. I read it in the words of Jonathan Greenblatt of the Anti-Defamation League and others who echoed him when he said, "If one day Muslim Americans will be forced to register their identities, then that is the day that this proud Jew will register as a Muslim." I witness it in Muslim communities in this country who have responded with empathy and generosity toward Jewish communities who have suffered from anti-Semitic attacks, as happened in St. Louis. And by the way, soon we plan also to create a banner of solidarity to share with Congregation Bethel, and you'll have an opportunity to sign it. I heard it in the speakers at the TCU March earlier this year after the travel ban was first announced. There were campus leaders of every different background who brought their particular perspective to the gathering and what they shared. But they also expressed solidarity with other groups who were marginalized and expressed a commitment to our shared democratic values. In this time, when so many categories of people feel vulnerable, the moment is ripe for powerful work and coalitions that are grounded in these shared democratic values. Deep down, we know that we can only be truly great together, as one nation, indivisible. There is much good work happening. At the same time, I see a despondency nipping at our heels. Do such efforts really matter? We may wonder. The words of Yeats from his poem, The Second Coming, echo in my mind. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Or worse than anarchy? Daily, it seems, commentators are discerning whether we are on some slide from oligarchy, merely domination by our economic elite, which social science has confirmed, sliding from mere oligarchy into authoritarianism, fascism, totalitarianism, autocracy. I feel like I'm constantly looking up these long words to make sure I really understand what they mean. Religious liberals have long believed that the American experiment should work for everyone. Even though it never really has, we have progressed in that direction over the centuries, piece by piece and struggle by struggle, as so many in our country worked to build a more perfect union. More and more people have gained greater access to the American dream. And now suddenly, much of that progress seems in danger of coming undone. I don't know about you, but I open up the newspaper in the morning and I see harmful rollbacks coming at us faster than we can possibly respond effectively. Even if today's champions of inclusive democratic values organize more relentlessly than other grassroots movements have, how likely is it that we will be able to address all the dangers that are lurking? How much harm will be done to persons and to our democratic institutions? It's easy to feel overwhelmed at the pace and the scale of the challenges. So let us zoom out more, expanding the historical scope of our vision further. I think this may help us understand our place in the scheme of things and the work that is ours to do now. In his book, Reclaiming Prophetic Witness, Unitarian Universalist theologian Paul Razor zeroes in on a central tension that has been present from the founding of our democracy by colonists from Europe. The United States developed a strong tradition of democracy, drawing upon European intellectual influences like republicanism or representative government, social contract, civil liberties, and so on. This is a central part of our American identity. But we also inherited the impulse toward empire that was then dominant in Europe, right along with the colonies the European powers established on this continent. Those two tendencies, toward democracy and toward empire, have always been in tension in the United States of America. And as Razor observes, the trends of weakening our democracy did not start recently, not as recently as it may seem to some of us. Scholars have chronicled how even before 9/11, indeed since the end of the Cold War in 1989, the American impulse toward empire has been on the ascendant. Now, what is meant by this word empire in the context of the United States? History recognizes many empires that have come and gone. We might think now of Russia, longing to return to its idea of greatness, and perhaps meddling in American democracy toward that end. When our country imprisoned Japanese Americans during World War II, we were at war with an empire, Japan, that clearly deserved the label. that embraced it, that was ruled by an emperor. We did not call ourselves an empire, however. America has never spoken of itself as an empire. The idea runs counter to our mythology about who we are. But the history of wars and conflicts in this very territory for this continent, between the new settlers and various Native American tribes, as well as with other colonial powers jockeying for resources in America, this history makes clear that whether or not we called ourselves an empire, the U.S. behaved like one from the very beginning. That hasn't fundamentally changed in our present era. Writing in 2012, UU theologian Paul Reiser describes American empire in terms of the impulse to amass power, both inside and outside our own borders. Around the world, American empire operates through U.S. military presence, global economic power, and the worldwide influence of American culture, he says. Internally, American empire is expressed as the increasing concentration of economic and political power in the hands of fewer and fewer people. It is also evident, he says, in the blending of governmental and corporate power that gives large corporations unparalleled influence over public policy, both domestic and foreign. Reiser invites us to understand these internal and external dimensions of American empire as two sides of the same coin. Both, he says, shape the context within which liberal prophetic voices must speak. Now, I'm fairly new to Texas, but it seems to me that Texas, of all places, ought to have some understanding of the United States' status as an imperial force. Since the Mexican-American War was driven by U.S. aspirations to expand its territory and led to Texas becoming a U.S. state. But it's not often that we hear the connection that Reiser makes between the way our nation operates in the world and the inequality and undermining of democracy here at home. Yet they are inextricably linked. If we care about democracy, we can't not talk about empire. Because the inequalities inside our nation that imperil its democracy are a result of the same impulse to be great that drives our global imperialism. Here's the fundamental truth for me. We can only be great together. Greatness does not consist of dominance over others, of more land, more economic sway, more prestige, more influence on the world scene, a bigger house or better test scores or more beautiful children. Or if that's what we mean by greatness, it's the wrong aspiration. I do want to be secure and happy, to meet basic needs and to be free and have the opportunity to flourish. But I want this for everyone else too, all around the world. This is a common attitude among religious liberals. We Unitarian Universalists express it in our second and sixth principles. We seek justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And we support the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. As Reiser points out, liberal prophetic voices have always spoken out on these issues in America. I was reminded of this part of our UU heritage last week when I was in Boston. Walking with some friends around Walden Pond, same place some of our youth will be visiting on their heritage trip soon, I drank in the peaceful sight of sunlight glinting off blue waters. I breathed in the scent of tall, elegant pines and smoothed my fingers over mossy rocks. It was a pilgrimage, the place where the Unitarian and Transcendentalist Henry David Thoreau carried out his experiment in simple living. He embodied a different idea of greatness. I went to the woods, Thoreau wrote, because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach. and not, when I came to die, discover I had not lived? Did he feel deprived by the simple hut where he slept and studied, ate and wrote? I think not. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, he said. And so he did. Now that sounds great to me. Even more pointedly at odds with the strain of empire in American culture, which is fundamentally about the acquisition of capital and material wealth, Thoreau wrote in Walden that my greatest skill has been to want but little. During his time at Walden Pond, Thoreau remained more engaged in the wider world than I had realized before. His later speech and essay on civil disobedience grew out of an experience that took place then, as he protested what he saw as the unjust, imperialistic U.S. war with Mexico that sought to expand slave-owning territory. Like his fellow transcendentalist Theodore Parker, Thoreau followed the dictates of his conscience. A very few as heroes, patriots, martyrs, reformers in the great sense, and men, he said, serve the state with their conscience also, and so necessarily resist it for the most part, and they are commonly treated as enemies by it. He had experienced this enemy treatment directly when he refused to pay a poll tax to support the greedy war with Mexico and was jailed for it. That was the origin of his essay, Civil Disobedience. For Thoreau, the law of conscience was higher than the law of the land. This tradition of civil disobedience has become part of our national culture as a whole. We all claim it, and rightly so. Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. were influenced by it, and the Takai family were among those in the Japanese concentration camps who engaged in deliberate civil resistance, understanding that as part of the American tradition. But I believe this tradition of principled resistance to injustice particularly calls to those of us who continue to practice liberal religion. Whether through active participation in the political process as citizens or through civil disobedience, we must continue to heed the dictates of conscience, especially against the powerful forces of empire that would divide and conquer us from the inside. Now, in his own time, Thoreau's idea of civil disobedience was fairly quietly received. Nobody made much fuss about it or started copying him right away. But later, it had powerful ripple effects throughout America and the world. And I think we can take a lesson from that. We cannot know what impact our actions will have. But I am as sure as Walden Pond is blue that our actions do matter. As James Baldwin reminded us in the reading earlier, we are responsible to future generations for what we do in this moment that is ours. For the moment we break faith with one another, the sea engulfs us, and the light of democracy goes out. When it seems bleak, let us remember that nothing is fixed. The earth is always shifting. The light is always changing. The sea does not cease to grind down rock. We are not stuck, inevitably, with empire. We are that sea, that change. In fact, public intellectual Cornel West, writing on democracy and empire, offers hope in his estimation that the forces of democracy are ultimately stronger than the forces of empire. Democracy is stronger than empire. So that love, that unity, that indivisibility that powers our efforts to defend democracy and to live out the truth that we can only be great together. Let us support one another week by week as we seek to put our weight behind democracy. Thus may we keep faith with our whole human family. So may it be. Amen.